is the strangest thing. It's shorter than you think. No thing is shorter than you. Longing is the music of our sphere. The gift of life is never more or less. It starts at any time you like and ends in just a wink. Pass me the lighter, baby.
Alrighty, good evening, everybody. Welcome to Stakeout. Welcome to the Daily Examiner. I hope you guys are doing well today. If you don't know me, my name is Dave. I'm your host tonight, part of the Daily Examiner team. So thank you for joining us here tonight. Hope your day is going well. I didn't have such a great afternoon. Had to watch the Blues get beaten by the Brumbies over in Melbourne, so that wasn't fun. But hey, we'll move on and we will win the trophy at the end of the season. So that's awesome. Thank you guys for joining us. Like I say, hope you've had an awesome day. Hope your week's been well. Hope you've managed to get some rest over the weekend. And we're going to get into things soon. Just some of you maybe have been aware that the Daily Examiner website was down over the past week. Had some back-end issues there with some of the software, but fortunately we've got that up and running. A bit of a stressful week because I'm also the webmaster for the site, so that was fun for me, but glad that we have got that up and running again. Hey, we've got a few things to discuss tonight. We are going to be talking Brian Tamaki, Cyclone Gabriella, the issues down in Hawke's Bay. Later on, Liz Gunn is joining us on the show to talk about her arrest and then a few other interesting things that have happened throughout the week. But without further ado, I'd like to bring on my first guest tonight. Jake, are you there? There we go. I'll just add Jake to the stream. This is Jake Stowers, everybody. Jake Stowers is a pastor. He has a degree in theology from Kerry Baptist College. Good evening, Jake. How are you?
Hey, Dave. How you going, bro? Good to see you.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. Great to have you on. Jake's a good friend of mine, so we're going to have a chat to him just about some of the comments that Brian Tamaki has made. It as expected, he's come out after a natural disaster and had some ideas and reasons why this might have happened. So he's blamed abortion, homosexuals, and porn for Cyclone Gabriella. Now, there was an article in the Herald a few days ago, which if I can find that in my papers here, I'll read out. I don't think I have it here. That's fine. But basically, he's blamed, like I say, homosexuals, abortion, and porn for Cyclone Gabriella. He says that Gisborne and the Hawke's Bay have the highest rates of porn usage in New Zealand, and so he reckons that this is judgment from God upon the Hawke's Bay and the Gisborne region for this. So, Jake, from a biblical perspective, is there a precedent for Brian Tamaki's comments? I mean, obviously, looking at the Bible, there's several stories and incidences such as Noah's Ark, where God did destroy the world with a flood because of sin. Sodom and Gomorrah would probably come to mind. What's the biblical precedent, if any, for Brian's comments?
Yeah, good question, Dave. And like you said, Dave, I think if the question is simply, is there biblical precedent for God using natural disasters, to judge from Scripture? The answer would be obviously yes. We can see that in Genesis 6 and 8, where God, floods the world with a global flood. To do that, we see that. We can see that in, I think, Genesis 19, where God, judges Sodom and Gomorrah for just rampant immorality and deviancy and perversion, all those sort of things. We can see in Exodus as well, where God judged the Egyptians for their treatment of Israel through the 10 plagues. So we do see that. We do see that there are instances in Israel's history where God did choose to judge them through natural disasters. Now, I think the question is, do these accounts in Israel's history where God chooses to judge through natural disasters, are these instructive for us? Do they give us a pattern where we can say, actually, God is doing the same thing today? I think that's the question we're getting at, Dave. Is that on point?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's where we're looking to go tonight.
Yeah, and I think it's sorry, bro. Did you want to say something, bro? Yeah.
No, you go ahead.
Yeah, so the question, I think, is, are these accounts, are they instructive for us, or do they give us a pattern where we can say God is doing the same thing today? I think just a couple of quick points. I think the first point would be is that there are instances in the Bible where pestilences or famines are mentioned and then they're not tied to God's judgment. We can see in the story of Abraham, for example, or the story of David or Joshua, where famines are mentioned, but they're not connected to judgment. So we cannot say biblically we cannot make a categorical statement that every natural disaster is a judgment from God, because Scripture doesn't make that statement either. I think the second point would be is that these accounts we mentioned, from Sodom and Gomorrah, Noah's flood, the Egyptians being judged, these accounts are, in my opinion, for the most part, they are descriptive, not prescriptive. In other words, they are describing accurately God's judgment in Israel's history, but they are not necessarily prescribing a teaching or a pattern for us that we can apply for our contemporary context. Let me give you an example of what I mean, Dave. In 2 Chronicles, for example, I'll just read the text. 2 Chronicles chapter 7. This text is often read when there's a natural disaster and people need to come back to God, and sort of pastors will proclaim this. In 2 Chronicles chapter 7, verse 13 to 14, it reads, "When I shut up heaven and there is no rain, or command the locust to devour the land, or send pestilence among my people, if my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, I will hear them." Now, that text is often quoted from biblical Christian leaders or pastors to say, listen, this is happening to us. This is applicable to us. The reality is, though, we have to look at the context of each one of those instances where judgment from natural disasters occurred. So if we look at 2 Chronicles chapter 7, in context, God is speaking directly to King Solomon, specifically about the nation of Israel and his covenantal relationship with them. And if you read in, I think, Deuteronomy chapter 28 to 30, God lays out things that will happen to the nation of Israel if they stray far from him. He lays out consequences to their sin if they drift further and further away from them because of their sin. So my pushback would be, Dave, is that yes, this happens in Scripture, but these accounts are, for my opinion, for the most part, descriptive, not prescriptive. And when we read them in context, you cannot make an application and say, this is a pattern for us today. This God will do the exact same thing if this happens, because they are describing Israel's history. So we cannot say conclusively, these are sort of instructions for us today. That would be my pushback as well. I think also, Dave, is that if God did, let's say hypothetically that God is judging through this means, through Cyclone Gabriel, for example, none of us would be privy to that information. Okay, God doesn't consult me, God doesn't consult Dave, he doesn't consult Brian Tamaki when he chooses to judge a nation for sin. So none of us will be privy to that information if God chooses to act that way, because God doesn't consult any of us. I think the best answer, Dave, would be to this. The reason why there are natural disasters today is because I think Paul gives us the best answer in Romans chapter 8, verse 28, that, listen, we live in a fallen world, where, in fact, Paul even says that creation is groaning, that creation is experiencing birth pains. Creation is subject to decay, to disorder, to decline, to entropy, to all these things, because we live in a fallen world. This is the reality that we live in, a world that is chaotic, a world that is in disorder, a world that is subject to death, to chaos, to disruption. And the biblical answer is there will come a time where Christ will return and reconcile all things to himself, including a world that is chaotic, where death and decay and demise are still rampant. Christ will reconcile those things to himself when he returns. So that would be my pushback there. Does that make sense, bro?
Yeah, thanks for that. So some great points there. I don't know actually what's happened here. Hold on. I kicked Jake out of the stream instead of putting it back in the right view. Sorry, Jake. Thanks for that. Those, really good points there. So what you're saying is that, yes, there is precedence biblically for it, but we cannot categorically say that this is the case. If that's where I think you're getting at. Brian Tamaki obviously is also a pastor. He runs a church actually close to us in South Auckland. Is a Christian leader talking like this, and specifically Brian in this case, is he doing good for the gospel? Because I know Brian does want to do good for the gospel, and I'd like to preface this by saying that Brian Tamaki is actually down in the Hawke's Bay right now as we speak. I believe he's helping out there. He's on the ground, as you can see there, which is more than I can say for a lot of his critics. But is this sort of commentary from a pastor or a Christian leader, is it helpful to the message of the gospel, or is it detrimental to it?
Yeah, no, good question, Dave. Look, Dave, neither of us are here to bash Brian or to be an apologist for Brian. I will say this, is that the gospel message is inherently polarizing. It's inherently offensive. Jesus is saying, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man comes to the Father but by me. That is perhaps the most polarizing statement in all of religion, to say that he is the only way to the Father, that if you try and come in another way, you're a thief and a robber. Paul even says that the gospel message is foolishness to those who are perishing. So the biblical gospel is inherently polarizing, it's inherently offensive, it's inherently even divisive, because it's making an exclusive claim to truth. Having said that, though, Dave, I think our responsibility, mine and Brian's and any other pastors, is to make sure that we are not adding needlessly to the offense of the gospel. Okay, so we have to make sure that we are not adding needlessly to the offense of the gospel. We can do that by, through inflammatory rhetoric, through drawing hard lines in the sand where scripture draws no lines, by divisive rhetoric, by things that are offensive, but they're sort of things that we've added onto the gospel and under the guise of, look, listen, the truth is offensive, the truth is divisive, sort of thing. No, the gospel is offensive, but our responsibility as ministers of the gospel is to make sure that we don't add needlessly to the offense of the gospel. In fact, in Titus, it puts it this way. It says, we have to make sure that we adorn the gospel. We adorn the gospel. In other words, we make the gospel appealing or alluring or attractive, not by making it shallow or compromising it, but rather by being living examples of its transforming power, by being living examples of a life that is transformed by the gospel. So that would be my encouragement to anybody, to Brian, to myself, to all of us as gospel ministers, to make sure that we are not doing things that are actually adding more hurdles to people coming to faith through divisive rhetoric, through drawing unnecessary lines in the sand, and all the sort of things that we do. We have to make sure that we adorn the gospel by being living examples of its transforming power. I will say this as well, bro, is that the role of a shepherd, for those in ministry, there were people watching who know this far more than I do. When you consider that Jesus used that analogy for a shepherd, the shepherd during Jesus' time was not a glamorous role. It was not a role where a role that you got into because you wanted to lord it over people, or you wanted sort of affluence or position or status. It was a role that required tremendous humility to take up. That's why Jesus used this analogy, because a shepherd is the one who serves. It is a servant of people. It is the one where our primary responsibility is to serve and love the people under our care. We're not here to lord it over people. We're not here to sort of for a glamorous position or to be affluent. We are here to serve the people of God the best we can. That is the primary function of a pastor or shepherd. So that would be my sort of admonishment, Dave. And I know it's very general, but that would be my sort of encouragement to anybody, to make sure that we're not adding needlessly to the offense of the gospel through divisive rhetoric and sort of other stupid things we can all do as well.
Great, thanks. So on this, great thoughts there, really good. On this sort of topic, obviously leading into the election later on this year, Brian's very involved in politics. There's certain other Christians who are very involved in politics. What is the role of the church, of ministers, of religion in politics? Is it appropriate for a church to be used as a campaign for so-called good politics, or should it be left out completely? And are politics and the gospel even compatible?
No, good question, Dave. This is my position. I think if you're a pastor or a shepherd or an elder, look, you should be known first and foremost as a shepherd. Like that should be your identity. And again, just to reiterate what that is, obviously Christ is the good shepherd. He is the shepherd. And as pastors or leaders, we are the under shepherds, where our responsibility primarily is to love people, serve people, and lead them, primarily so to ensure that they are becoming more like Christ. That is the primary goal of the Christian life, is to become like Jesus. And my responsibility, all of us as Christian leaders, our responsibility is to serve and love people and lay our lives down for them in order that they will become more like Christ. So I think it's really important that if we are pastors or leaders or shepherds, that we are known primarily for that responsibility. That we don't want to conflate our office or our responsibility with political activism, with sort of social justice, with being involved in politics and political campaigning. We have to be known primarily as shepherds who feed the flock of God, who love and serve people and proclaim the gospel. That is our responsibility. Having said that, Dave, I will say this, is that the gospel does have moral implications. So the gospel does have moral implications. If you say that you've been saved by the gospel, if you've been changed from the inside out and you know Jesus, that's going to incur moral changes in your life. And it does mean that the gospel does have moral implications. So that means that when politics and morality intersect, that is of the interest of the Christian minister. That is of the interest of a Christian, because we want to be people who affirm righteousness. We want to be people who affirm things that are pleasing to God. Dave, I don't know if you agree with this definition, but politics, from what my understanding is, sort of the temporal rearrangement of society through law and legislation. The Christian is not indifferent to that, because often politics and morality intersect. That is where our interest is elicited, because we understand the gospel has moral implications. We want to be people who affirm righteousness, who affirm morality that is consistent with the character of God. So that's where our interest lays, David, not so much from a political perspective, but from a moral perspective, because we understand the gospel does have moral implications. And as a people of God, we want to affirm righteousness in the community amongst our people, because we know that's how people will flourish and live their best lives as well. And if I could add one more point, Dave, is that probably people, Christians watching who are actually interested in politics and want to be a light in that arena, there is a sense then in Colossians chapter 2, for example, Paul says that Christ is reconciling all things to himself. Okay, he is reconciling all things to himself. That is in the earth, on top of the earth, everything. Not just our personal relationship with Jesus, but every sphere, every structure, every system that is out of whack, that is out of alignment with the purpose of God. Christ is reconciling all things to himself. Now there is a now, but not yet reality to that work. We understand that when Christ returns, he will establish his kingdom, and he will definitively reconcile every system, every structure, every influence that's out of whack. He will reconcile all those things to himself. That is not yet. But in the meantime, we are called to actually reconcile all things to himself by being ambassadors for Christ, by being ministers of reconciliation. And that includes morality in the political realm as well. So people are interested, people who love Jesus, who want to get involved in politics. I think the impetus behind your effort should be the reality that Christ is reconciling all things to himself, and my responsibility in the political sphere is to make that happen in my sphere of influence. So that would be my my comments, Dave. Yeah.
That's really awesome, Jake. Hey, really appreciate your thoughts. Always so very articulate and very well thought out, and great to have your perspective. So, hey, thanks so much for coming on. It's been a real pleasure, and we'll definitely have you back next time we want to discuss some difficult faith or theological topics. But hey, thank you so much for coming on tonight, and yeah, enjoy the rest of your night. Thanks very much.
No worries, bro. Take care, right?
Cheers. Have a good night. Hey, we've got Liz Gunn in the background now. We're going to bring her on in just a minute to talk about what happened at Auckland Airport last week. So, Liz, welcome to the show. Nice to meet you. Hope you're doing well.
Look, I've still got my arm in a brace because there's a fracture just down where the thumb comes down and kind of meets the wrist. Around about there was a little fracture, and that's because this guy from the police who came up and said, "Get out of the airport," and we hadn't been trespassed. We were standing there meeting the Tokelauan, our Tokelauan brothers and sisters, the Patalasio family, who we helped to get out of lockdown. And we were really excited, and there were about 50 other people with iPads and iPhones, and we just had a camera where we could get some high resolution images, but we are not getting income from this. We don't sell this material. This is not a business. We are volunteers, and we have been for 2 years. And I had just tried to explain it to the airport security person, not arguing, not being rude, not being aggressive, just saying, look, can you explain why you're picking us out of all the other people who come and film at the airport? You know, what is this rule? She was very, very brittle and aggressive, and did that thing of talking over, where she wouldn't, you know, that thing that's happened in New Zealand in the last 2 years. The biggest thing we can do in New Zealand is not talk over each other, because then we'll hear and then we'll understand one another. So she went off and got the police. This guy rocks up behind me and goes, "Get out of the airport." And I think every New Zealander should know this. If a policeman tells you to do something, the first question is to say, under what piece of legislation are you acting? What's the law here? What's giving you these rights to do this? Well, he wasn't having a bar of it, and he grabbed my hand and he twisted it right behind, you know, the way we saw in the Wellington Freedom Village, right behind, very painful. I'm a grandmother. I've got a 1.5-year-old grandchild. It was just beyond my comprehension. I've never been in a situation like that. He was violent straight away. This was within 10 seconds of his arrival behind me. And it's very hard to think really clearly, like part of your brain is just going, what the hell is going on? What is happening? I stay very calm under pressure. I've had that from years of being in media. So, you know, I wanted to speak, but he'd really exacerbated the situation, inflamed it. So there was no discussion, nothing like these old community constables who used to say, let's step outside and have a discussion. None of that, just total escalation by the police. And so as the pain of it, when he twisted my arm right behind my shoulder and it was coming, my hand was right up there, I sort of dropped down. I think my knees kind of gave way. And then I felt him pulling my thumb back, really pulling it hard. And so I yelled, "Stop it, you are hurting me." And the second time I heard him say, "Good." And then he started going, "Move, move." But I was down on the floor. It was just like a reaction from him, just to up the bullying. And what I think he did was he pulled my thumb so hard that a little bit of crack happened at the wrist there. Anyway, it was a horrific situation. And the explanation I gave the other day on Twitter Spaces was, if you ever want to know what it feels like to be a sack of potatoes, being arrested in 2023 by a New Zealand police, what I would call a thug, and I'll be happy to say that in front of the judge. That's what it feels like. It feels as if all your human rights have gone, all human dignity, all human compassion and kindness and just everything that made New Zealand great. And it really, for a moment there, I thought, am I in communist China? It was horrific. And I didn't resist as he was rough and brutal. And he got me up and he was walking behind me. And I looked at all these kind of very numbed faces. And I said, we have to stand together. We are losing our country. Outside, there was a photograph of him leaning over me. I was saying to him, please don't hurt my wrist. My wrist is hurting. You don't have to put those, I keep calling them cufflinks, but I've never had them on my wrist before. What are they called? Handcuffs. I've never had handcuffs on. Obviously, I've never been arrested. And he just did it. Everything he wanted to do was kind of to humiliate, I felt. And when he'd finally done that, and I went over to Jonathan, my wonderful cameraman who'd been rugby tackled from the side, and our camera had been smashed. He also was in handcuffs. I was still really calm. I turned to him and said, what is the legislation under which you are purporting to act? And this was really frightening, Dave. He said, I don't have to tell you that, in that kind of voice. And so I said, since when, sir? And he said, since forever. Now, the third policeman who came along, I repeated that, and he said, well, that's absolutely wrong. A policeman always has to say to one of the people he's paid out of our taxes, and he's meant to represent us and be there to keep the peace. If we ask him a question like that, and it's polite and calm, he should always explain the legislation. So halfway through, they came to me and said, we can drop all this, make it go away, if you will admit you did something wrong. And I looked at that third policeman and said, but you know I didn't do something wrong. And he just looked at me in silence. And then I thought of all the other people this could happen to, all the other middle New Zealanders, all the other grandmothers, all the other children, youths, people in their 70s. How brutal is this country going to get if we don't stand up? So there was no choice. And I just said to him, well, I will agree to that if you will make sure that that thug signs a piece of paper in front of me admitting that he said good when I told him it was hurting, and admitting that he has really roughed me up. And the policeman said, that's never going to happen. So I said, well, let the cards fall where they may, and we'll go to court. And I will put this before a judge, because I have to, as a lawyer, still believe that we have a justice system that is just in New Zealand. And what that policeman did was so unjust. Sorry, it's a long explanation, but it's important for all Kiwis, this story.
No, that's all good. Thanks for your story. And whatever the situation was, obviously that was a horrific incident for you. So we obviously our thoughts and prayers are with you, and we hope that you are getting better and doing well. I've had a few questions come in from people throughout the week when they heard that you were coming on. This is the Auckland Airport website directly, basically saying if you would like to film or take photo commercially at Auckland Airport, that you need to seek approval in advance of your visit. The question that's come through is, did you have prior approval to film or take photos at the airport before you went in? And
the most important word there is commercially. And I think I addressed that early on. We're not a commercial organization. We do this voluntarily, and we do it because we care about freedom in this country being taken. We care about tyranny coming in. And look, just this last week, with a hand in a sling, I've had to move house, and I've had to move because we couldn't afford the rent where we were living. I've given up everything for this work over the last 2 years, because I think we really all should give up as much as we possibly can to stand for the freedom in our country. So I explained that, and that's actually on the recording of the microphone that they took, where I was saying to somebody else, not the woman who came up to us, but someone else in the airport, look, I just wanted to explain to her, we're not a commercial enterprise. We're not like TV1 or TV3 where you get a daily wage for doing this job. We are just a group of volunteers, and we literally came out to be like family greeting family. And our camera might be a little bit bigger, but it's not for money that we're doing this. We're doing it for love.
So from the perspective of the airport, is it, I guess, conceivable then that because you had a dedicated camera person and because you weren't using it, I guess, for strictly personal use, could that have been why they would have, and do they have a point there that it could be for commercial use, even if it's not being sold or used for profit?
Commercial use means commerce, and commerce means you're making money from it. But there is another section to those regulations, because I've looked at those, and it says with social media, if you're filming, in other words, doing social media or just greeting family and friends, and you're going to put it up on social media, which is what we do to let other Kiwis who care about the Patalesios know. That was what our intention was. It just says make sure you've got the permission of the people you're filming. And obviously, we've found lots of footage online since of like, I think it was a rapper coming back and there was a big haka and the camera was panning all across the crowd. We weren't doing any of that. We were just going to pan and film in on the Patalesios. And, there are lots of all black welcomes where you see lots of crowd shots. We weren't filming any of that. We were just filming the family who'd said to us, we would love you there. So if you read the regulations a bit further down, that's what it says. You just have to have the permission of someone who is being filmed if it's social media.
Right. Okay. You were arrested and charged with assault, trespass, and resisting arrest. Now, the trespass one was interesting to me because in order to be arrested for trespass, I would assume that you would have to have been previously trespassed from a venue. Have you been trespassed from the airport before?
You've just cut out. Are you there?
Can you hear me? I think we both cut out there. So just to go back over my question, in order to be arrested for trespass, my understanding is that you would have had to be previously trespassed from a venue. Had you been previously trespassed from the airport or anywhere in the area?
I've never been trespassed from there. And my understanding also is that it was up to the airport security to give us written or at the very least verbal notification that we were trespassed, and we didn't have that. All she said was, you're not to use that camera. And then I was saying to her, what is your reason? Under what, rule is this? And are you aware we're not a commercial enterprise? So that's as far as the conversation got with that airport security woman, but she wasn't listening. But I would have said before the policeman came in and said, get off the property, we would have to have had a notification from some.
Oh, I think Liz has just cut out there. We'll just hold on for a second and see if the connection comes back. Just chuck up in the comments if you can hear me or if you can hear her.
I can.
There we go.
A little bit funny. Yeah.
There we go.
So I think that the protocols weren't observed, and that could be another reason why they came up and said, oh, let's just drop this. And, I could have dropped it to save my own, it would have been my own sorry ass if I just thought about myself, but I didn't. I think that there's a bigger picture here, and that it's important to stand and say what went on there was absolutely unjustified, out of all proportion. There was no resistance to arrest, not at all. If anything, I was just so staggered by the amount of violence that was perpetrated on me for nothing. So, and what was the other charge?
It was assault, trespass, and resisting arrest.
There was no assault. The only assault thing I could think they're trying to trump up is that with the woman who wouldn't listen. I'm quite tactile. If you look at my interviews, I often will reach out and touch someone who's crying or whatever. I just am a tactile person. And when she wouldn't listen, I gently laid my hand on her forearm and said, look, can we just talk about this? Because she was very prickly and sort of very angry person. And she pulled her arm away and said, don't touch me, which, again, just struck me as very non-Kiwi and highly sort of, exacerbating the situation, certainly not inflaming a situation. So I said, I apologize, but that is not an assault. And there are very good witnesses who will testify to that, and including a doctor there who was just horrified at what he saw, horrified. He said there was no reason for them to do that to you, Liz. So they are willing to testify in court.
Oh, that's interesting because I imagine that the airport security cameras will be in court, so it'll be very interesting to see how they work that one, and be interesting to see the footage there in court because I imagine that will be very helpful.
I've already applied on Friday through a lawyer to get that airport footage. So let's hope something hasn't gone wrong with the airport cameras. I'm sure they'll be on.
A couple more things before I let you go tonight, Liz. You were formerly worked at you were host of several radio and TV shows in the past, and some of your colleagues have spoken out publicly about it. 7 Sharp host Hilary Barry has spoken out about her concern for former TV presenter Liz Gunn after the conspiracy theorist was arrested at Auckland Airport, and she tweeted, "This is posted without animosity, but please keep Liz Gunn in your thoughts and prayers. Her descent into the conspiracy realm makes me really sad and concerned." And then singer Lizzie Marvelly also replied, saying, "It's very painful to watch. I feel sorry for her and also despair for the people she's influencing and dragging down the rabbit hole with her." Just quickly, do you have a response to those?
I thought that was really toxic femininity. If you want to know what toxic femininity looks like, it's when a woman pretends to care and she doesn't, when she looks to say something really undermining in this very patronizing ersatz caring way, when it's not caring at all, when in fact what they're both looking to do is deride and, find another way to spin the government narrative, which they've done from my first love letter, simply because I talked about Mother Earth crying for her people. It's a metaphor Indigenous people would understand, but what they did from that day, the only way from my first love letter, obviously the PR spin doctors said, how are we going to bring down Liz Gunn? Let's call her mad. Well, that's an old trope, and that's what I said to Sean Plunkett as well. This is a tired trope it's been used since the era of the witches, I think, let's call any woman who dares to stand out from the pack, particularly women get this actually, and sadly, it's worst when it's from other bitchy women. Let's call any woman who dares to stand out, be articulate, think for herself, think differently, and have insane, nuts. Well, I'm highly, highly rational. I've done a lot of work, through law and through media, but I've also done a lot of personal work to really understand who I am. And I want to register here that trope, that tired, old, hackneyed cliche for a woman, it just won't work in this case. And I don't think any woman or any man who has a different view should be called that. We should have a society where diversity of views is celebrated. And it's that old adage, I may not agree with what you think, but I will die for your right to say it and express it and think it. And I think it just showed those two women as not just bitchy, but extremely small-minded and not particularly intelligent. I mean, I don't know why either of them is in mainstream media. We need a much higher standard of commentariat in our mainstream media. But that's what you get when the government wants people who are shills, who are going to just say what they want and speak the government narrative. And it leaves it up to the rest of us. It behoves us to be inordinately brave and call them out. And I think that's what thousands of Kiwis did with people are telling me her nickname is Shillery Barry because she's a shill for the government. Someone wrote to me and said, Liz, it was Thursday, there are 975 comments supporting you, and there's only one comment supporting Shillery. So, it doesn't, Kiwis are seeing through it. We're not a stupid nation. And Lizzie, what's her name? The singer. I mean, I don't know why she's a commentator anyway, but, it's as if she's saying Kiwis are so weak-minded that if I express a view, I'll be leading them down a whole. No, they take my views and they take Shillery's views and they take all these views and we all do. And we go, does that make sense? Yeah, it makes sense. Or no, it doesn't make sense to me. And a lot of us are looking at mainstream media now and saying, you guys just don't make sense anymore. You guys just are so sold out and so corrupted. I think Joe Rogan about a week ago said, it's happening around the world. And he was talking about it. And he said, I just call them whores. They're sellouts. They're being paid. They're being paid to prostitute what is, I think, a sacred profession. If we don't have a strong, independent media, we will have a tyrannical government. And I want to add at the end of this interview, that's why I appreciate the professionalism of what you're doing here at the Daily Examiner. I really do. I think it's great. You've cross-examined me, and I've been looking at your articles, and I've just thought you've achieved a consistently high standard. So congratulations.
Oh, thanks for that, Loves. Hey, Harry's just posted a comment up here, which I think gets to the point that I want to raise as well. I was trespassed from the Avondale Library for the protest drag queen story hour in Avondale Library. Police warned us multiple times that we'd be arrested. We said we were prepared to be arrested and still weren't arrested. What they've done to Liz is lunacy. So on Harry's point here, and from my experience, obviously police don't, in New Zealand at least, from what I've seen, tend to just jump in and brutalize people like that. And so I think what we're missing here, and what's missing from the story, is context before the event. So we've heard up from when you were approached by airport security. Was there anything before you were approached by airport security that might have provoked such a response? Because I know also you mentioned to Sean Plunkett in the text that you sent him that he read out on air, pretty much personal insults about the officer that arrested you. Do you think that there was a conspiracy against you before that? Because I mean, in my opinion, the officer didn't wake up. I mean, the officer may not have even known who you were. He probably didn't wake up in the morning planning to arrest you. What are your thoughts around that?
What was your reference to personal insults from Sean to me, or what were you saying?
Oh, sorry.
There?
When you texted Sean about the officer that arrested you, the terms that you used to describe the officer in the text were probably bordering on insulting. I don't know if you may not have meant it that way, but just the way that you described
No,
him.
I said he had. It was slightly sardonic, but it was slightly humorous. It's got a slight bit of Kiwi humor in it. But I was saying he sort of had these large. I was trying to emphasize the fact he had very large muscles. He was probably twice my weight. He was pushing right up against me with his chest right out, really intimidatory behavior. And had sort of looked like those huge steroidal muscles that men get when they pump a lot in the gym. And, he's taller than me. And I think I said to Sean, and, he had a sort of too tight shirt on, a small neck, and possibly an intellect that matched it. And the reason I said that was, as I went on to elaborate, when I ask an officer of the law in this country, as somebody with legal training, under what law are you purporting to act? I absolutely expect them to have the intelligence and the, integrity to say to me, oh, it's under this section of this statute that I am acting. And he just told me straight out. He didn't have to tell me. Well, that really upsets me. And later on in the piece to Sean, I said, what are the standards of recruitment under Andrew Costa, the head of the police, who, we saw last week, was already up in a bit of hot water for telling things that were not strictly true about Hawke's Bay and what was going on there and misleading Chris Hipkins. So, it behoves us to ask these questions. That's not being rude. It's not being gratuitously rude. It's saying that was an extraordinarily unintelligent and absolutely inaccurate and quite frankly illegal answer that police officer gave me. He can't go around roughing up a grandmother or any New Zealander with no explanation of what she's done wrong, under what statute have done this apparent wrong, and without any kind of warning at all. So, yeah, in answer to your earlier question, I've had many people contact me this week saying, do you think they were just targeting you? Is it to rough you up, to try to intimidate you, to stop you speaking out, to stop you putting out stories of those who've been silenced, hurt, wounded by the jab, abused in Wellington? I try to tell the stories, as you do, that the mainstream media is conveniently, and the politicians are conveniently going, la, 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 I don't want to hear them, I don't want to hear them. So I try to do what good journalists should do, which is dig out those stories that are being hidden and ask, why are they being hidden? And what is going on in New Zealand? And why are we going so wrong in this country? And as someone said to me earlier this week, my God, Liz, this is really waking up Kiwis who before this were going, oh, well, yeah, the COVID thing wasn't very good, but I guess Jacinda was nice. I'm not quite sure about her, but I suppose we'll all get back to normal. No, we won't get back to normal till we look at the horrors that are being perpetrated under this government and sadly by our New Zealand police on innocent Kiwis.
Oh, thanks for clarifying that. Yeah, good to hear your perspective on those, because I know Sean just gave his opinion on it. So it's good to hear your side.
I'll tell you who was insulting. That was Sean. He absolutely said he'd give me a respectful platform, and he read that out in the most derisory tone. And what I gather, I never listened to him, but so many people contacted me and said they're disgusted, they're turning off him, they don't want to watch him anymore, that they thought that it showed up him, not me. That sort of lack of professionalism, lack of respect. And for me, I'd never trust him again. He gave me the assurances and then showed me through his actions he had no sincerity at all in his assurances.
Right. Okay. So just to clarify, finally, last thing. So from the moment that you walked into the airport and until you were approached by the security staff, there was nothing that provoked any sort of response that would justify what happened to you.
It's a good question. So I got there a little bit late because I'd rung the airport and they'd said the plane was half an hour late coming from Apia in Samoa. So I got there and my cameraman and friend, I say my cameraman because he knows how to do a camera and I know how to do an interview. So we call each other that, but we're friends, we're mates.
Right.
He had been wandering around with the camera, on full display for sort of 45 minutes till I got there, having a coffee. Nobody had asked him anything. And then when I get there and there were these other lovely supporters and I said, I'd like to ask you, his beautiful man, his name was Keith, what brought you out on a Saturday night to meet a family you don't actually know? And he was telling me, I feel it's a really personal story. We should all care about the Pashalisios. The Tokalauans are our brothers and sisters. And to see that all of us who stood up for them helped them get out of this, in effect, prison for over a year for not having a jab, it really meant a lot to me. It was a lovely, lovely interview. And that was all we were doing. And then this little Indian security guard, I think he was, came up and I just went up, can I help you? And then he said, have you got a pass? And I said, we're not a commercial organization. And then he went off. And then this other woman came who was very, highly aggressive. And I think we've picked up the story from there. So that was all that happened. But what was interesting was that Jonathan wasn't accosted. It was only when I came on the scene, which, with all these people asking me, were you targeted? That bit is potentially evidence that I was, but I have yet to clarify that.
Right. Oh, thank you very much for that. Thank you for answering my cross-examination. Hope you enjoyed coming on our show. I'm looking forward to seeing the results of the court case, and we do wish you all the best. But thank you very much for your time tonight coming on, Liz.
It's a stand for all of us. I was momentarily for a moment tempted, take the easy path. But New Zealand, when we take the road less traveled, the one that is the harder path, it is the rockier path, we serve each other. And that's what we have to do. If we want to win back our freedom and win our country from these would-be tyrants, we have to be willing to stand for one another and care that much. And I care, and I know there are thousands of you who do, and I thank you all for your support. And thank you for this rigorous interview. It's been good. I've really enjoyed it. It's honorable. Thank you.
Thanks, Liz. Much appreciated. We'll let you go now, but thank you very much for your time, and I look forward to speaking again in future. Have a good night.
Cheers. Same. Bye.
All right. Thank you so much, Liz, for coming on. Been fantastic to be able to talk to her and get clarification on her side of the story. Just a couple of things, couple of interesting headlines over the week that's happened, which I'd like to cover. Richard Dawkins, well-known atheist, well-known scientist, has been in New Zealand recently, and he has stirred up some online controversy regarding an article that he wrote regarding Matauranga Māori. How do I pronounce that? Matauranga Māori. Yeah, that's right. Sorry, I probably really stuffed that up. But it's basically, as far as I understand, it is Māori knowledge. And it encompasses both mythology and practical science, such as navigation, how early Māori settlers grew and stored food, etc. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that that's what it is. Anyway, Richard Dawkins has come to New Zealand, and he's written an article saying Jacinda Ardern's government implemented a ludicrous policy spawned by Chris Hipkins's Ministry of Education before he became the Prime Minister. Science classes are to be taught that Māori ways of knowing, or Matauranga Māori, have equal standing with Western science. So this is interesting. So if my understanding of Matauranga Māori is correct, then it's both mythology and practical science. And so what Dawkins here is criticizing is the fact that they'll be teaching mythology as equal to science, accepted science. Obviously, this is a bit conflicting for me because I'm a Christian, so I believe a different science I suppose, to Richard Dawkins, but I do think that it differs from Māori mythology in that there is concrete evidence for intelligent design or creation science. But it's very interesting that he's putting this out. He mentions that there were some opposition to Mātauranga Māori being introduced into school science classes by some fellows of the New Zealand Royal Society, but they were threatened with an investigation. And one of them was affronted by a complaint that to insist that Māori children learn to read is an act of colonization. And Dawkins says, is there an implication here, condescending, if not downright racist, that Indigenous children need separate or special treatment? So yeah, I don't know. What are your thoughts on this, guys? I don't really hold too much of an opinion here. I'm not a scientist, obviously, so I can't speak, and I don't even fully understand Mātauranga Māori. And as I said, I disagree with Richard Dawkins on a lot of things. So I don't know. What are your thoughts here? Let me know what you think on this, and we won't spend too long on this. But should Māori and other mythology be taught as science in New Zealand schools? What are your thoughts here? Further, he goes on further to say, let me just find my paper here. It is here. This one's definitely here. There we go. New Zealand children will be taught the true wonder of DNA while being simultaneously confused by the doctrine that all life throbs with a vital force conferred by the Earth Mother and Sky Father. Origin myths are haunting and poetic, but they belong elsewhere in the curriculum. So he's saying that it should be taught, but elsewhere, not as part of science. He then goes on to say at the end of his article, Air New Zealand think it's a cute idea to invoke Māori gods for their in-flight safety briefing. Imagine if British Airways announced that their planes are kept aloft by the Holy Ghost in equal partnership with Bernoulli's principle and Newton's first law. So that is a funny comparison, I think. I can't actually remember. It's been a few months since I flew Air New Zealand, so I can't fully remember what the pre-flight safety video was, whether they were actually claiming that there's some mythological force that's keeping the planes flying, which would be absurd if it was. But yeah, funny comparison there. If British Airways were to say that the Holy Ghost is keeping the plane flying. But I don't know. Just thought that was very interesting. Also very interesting that Richard Dawkins in recent times has actually, I mean, I imagine he used to be a darling of the left because he is obviously very much anti-God. He's an atheist, well known to be an atheist. But in recent times, he's actually said a few interesting things. In recent times, Dawkins has begun to clash heads with woke leftist ideologies, saying that he would not stop using so-called problematic words defined as harmful by the EBB Language Project. This is an article from Fox News. It says, on Tuesday, academics working in ecology and evolutionary biology called for the avoidance of words such as male, female, man, woman, mother, father, alien, invasive, exotic, and race. The UK-based Telegraph reported instead they encouraged the use of terms such as sperm-producing or egg-producing or XY/XX individual to avoid emphasizing heteronormative views. Now, Richard Dawkins came out in response. He says, the only possible response is contemptuous ridicule, he told the Telegraph. I shall continue to use every one of the prohibited words. I'm a professional user of the English language. It is my native language. And then in 2018, he tweeted that, praising Christianity for being a bulwark against other cultural forces. Now, he's obviously a well-known atheist. So it's very interesting that these former darlings of the left are now coming around. So to some more centrist views, I guess, more logical views. But yeah, like I say, I'm not a scientist. I'm not an expert on this. So your thoughts? Rick says public education is an indoctrination, only teaching them what to think, not how to think. Yeah, that's very true. I think part of the decline of society is that a lack of critical thinking. So there should be, critical thinking needs to be much more involved in our schools. Pauline says no to any mythology taught in schools. Fair enough. Obviously there should be religion taught, I think. Obviously I'm a Christian, so I'm very pro Christianity being taught in schools, but I think that all options should be taught in schools, all religions, so that children are able to make an informed choice, like I say, with critical thinking and being able to develop their brains and their thinking and to form opinions for themselves, so that we do have intelligent, logical arguments in society. We're able to debate. We're able to form our own opinions and not be indoctrinated. So yeah, interesting thoughts there. I just thought there was a really interesting article that came out. One last thing before I close tonight. Ian Wishart is an investigative journalist. You may know of him. He's covered several interesting topics, especially relating to New Zealand history over the past few years. He has accused NIWA, which is the National Institute of Water and Atmospheric Research, of suppressing or removing evidence and records of previous severe weather events in New Zealand history. Obviously, prior to Cyclone Gabrielle. And what he's saying is that NIWA has actually removed evidence and records from their site and from their database of previous strong cyclones that have caused similar devastation or even worse in the history of New Zealand, to basically push the idea that this is a new thing that as a result of climate change. So I thought that's very interesting. I'll admit I haven't researched it. This is just something that's popped up in my Twitter feed, obviously. I've still got that banner up. Yeah, so that's popped up as my in my Twitter feed. So just been seeing a little bit of that. We might dig into that a bit more next week. I might even try and get Ian Wishart on to talk about that. But I just thought that was really interesting. Thought I should raise that to your attention. There is actually an article on our website, thedailyexaminer.co.nz, which does cover it in detail. So do go have a look at that. But that is very interesting. And if that is happening, that's quite disturbing. Anyway, that's about it for tonight. I'm loving life at the moment because Super Rugby is back on. If you don't like sport, feel free to tune out now. But I think it's been fantastic with the new laws coming into Super Rugby Pacific, which is fantastic, help speed up the game. Obviously, it was terrible to see the Blues lose today, but I just think that it's going to be a really exciting competition this year, so I'm looking forward to more of that. So that's me on my weekends when I'm not at church or when I'm not doing this. Anyway, it's been great to hang out with you guys tonight. I hope that you have enjoyed being here. Thank you for tuning in. There's a good bunch of you tonight, so thank you for all your comments. Hey, do continue to send through your thoughts. Obviously, tonight we had a bit of a pre-programmed schedule. We had a couple of guests on who had some awesome ideas, awesome things to share. Thanks so much to Jake Stowers, my good mate, for coming on and talking about the events down in Hawke's Bay. Brian Tamaki's comments. It was really awesome to have him on. Thanks again to Liz Gunn for coming on and sharing her side of the story. It was really good to have a robust conversation with her. Next week's discussion, we'll be back obviously Sunday nights, every Sunday night at 8 p.m. If you have topics for next week's discussion, tweet your ideas to me at the Dave Robson or at Daily Examiner NZ using the hashtag Stakeout so that we can get your thoughts and ideas. Go follow me there. Go follow the Daily Examiner. Let's have a discussion throughout the week. And it's been fantastic to have you guys with us. I hope you guys have an awesome week. If you're working or whatever you're doing, looking after kids at home, hope you stay blessed, hope you stay safe. Thank you so much for joining me. Have an awesome night, and we'll see you next week, 8 p.m. on Sunday. God bless.